Sherry will not be joining us online this evening. They have I think they call it open house. So she's got to be up at the school for that. Even though the whole thing's online, she's got to be at the school for it. So she could be at home pretending to be paying attention to it online, and instead she's at school and pretending to be able to pay attention to it there, I guess. So probably. She's had a neat story, a little girl that she was, I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but she Zoomed with all last year and never met her, but Zoomed with her. She was, I guess, a sixth grader last year. And this year she's a seventh grader, and every day she comes by and says hi. And so it's been a real enjoyable experience for her this year. Hi, Robin. Glad you were able to be here with us. She said she loved the music. I love the song. Like I said Sunday morning, we don't have music, do we? We have singing. Yeah. Well, been on 2 minutes, and we're glad to have Robin online. Maybe some other folks will join us here in a little bit. I was a little bit late getting the reminder out, but hopefully they know the routine by now. 1 John chapter 3, we're going to pick up in verse 11 and just read 2 verses. For this is the message which you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of the evil one and slew his brother. And for what reason did he slay him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Okay, what do we think about those 2 verses?
Ask the question, maybe because I don't remember. My memory is getting bad. Enough about Genesis.
If only someone would teach a series on Genesis.
Pardon me?
If only we could have a class series on Genesis.
Yeah. I'm just trying to remember.
Yeah, first Genesis, the first part of it's a long time ago. You know.
But it appeared like the thing he did wrong was the way he offered his sacrifice. Not that he offered him, but he did. That's the question I'm asking, because otherwise I don't know if anything else.
Well, he killed his brother. That was the.
Right, it led to the death of his brother, but it doesn't say there was any other hostility or any other problem between them. It was because of the offering of the sacrifice. And that, I guess, goes back to things today. Why do we see the killing in the Mideast and all that? It's over religion. It's over things that it shouldn't be over. Well, am I missing a point here or something?
Well, I think you're, not missing a point necessarily. You're maybe bringing some points into the discussion that perhaps John wasn't thinking of when he cited the story. In the context, it's kind of really a transitionary passage. He's talking about finding the true teachers versus the false teachers, and one of the tests is righteousness, and he's going to come back in later in the chapter and talk about the test being love. And you do have the unrighteousness of Cain, and that would have been maybe at its root. It doesn't say God punished Cain for the sacrifice. It said he had no regard for it. He had high regard for Abel's, but not Cain's. And then God warns him and says, sin is crouching at your door, which is but you must master it. And that's a sentence you really need to finish. Now, you must master it, because that's a very difficult sentence. That's a very difficult part of it. So it does make it kind of about righteousness and sin and unrighteousness, I guess. But for one thing, it does. Verse 11 goes back to the beginning. This is the message you have heard from the beginning. So John starts his gospel out in the beginning was the word, and the Genesis starts out in the beginning. God, and Cain and Abel isn't at the very beginning, but it's pretty close to the beginning. So this is the message that that John is trying to make the gospel be as eternal as possible. in his the message of Christ is not in a way a new message, because the message of Christ is love.
Which is the point I was making, that today, it's the same problem. There is fighting, there is killing over
Mm-hmm.
beliefs, somebody else, the two groups. I have this belief, and you're not right, and therefore, if you can't convert to my belief, I kill you. Well, it wasn't that, but yet it had to do with religion, not with some others. It had to do with the fact that he offered a sacrifice to God. So,
Well, I think the strife.
Used could be very dangerous.
I guess you could also say the strife going on here is religious. I mean, it's between John and some other religious teachers, and so that yeah.
And it's a serious matter, and God has warned us about things that have to do with that. But some people still don't get it.
Well, and for authentically following Jesus, it's not going to ever result in murder on your part. His disciples will not murder. They may be murdered,
Not the truth.
but they don't murder.
And we have many examples of that.
But yet we know throughout history, a lot of Christians have killed other Christians over religious disputes.
Even the apostles.
And you might not think either side of that dispute was actually Christians, but they certainly consider themselves to be Christians, and the world looks at them and considers themselves to be Christians. So maybe they weren't very good Christians, either one of them. But there is strife within the faith at all times, really. There's always going to be views and feeling, and usually it's not like one side is completely right and the other side is completely wrong. Usually there's some good and thoughtful people on both sides, and there is a difference of opinion, perhaps a difference of understanding, and instead of trying to find commonality and a way to coexist and love one another through our differences, we try to win the day on our differences all the time, have our way asserted. And we'll talk a little bit about that next in that chapter 4 in terms of some of our conflicts. But this passage, Cain and Abel, it goes back. So the message of Christ is really eternal, and the test of righteousness is ultimately also seen in the treatment of your brother. It's not just a matter of religious technical compliance. It comes back to Cain and Abel, Cain murdering his brother. And it's interesting because John says, not as Cain, who was of the evil one and slew his brother. Who were Cain's parents? Adam and Eve. Who was Abel's parents? Adam and Eve. Who were Adam and Eve's parents? No earthly parents. So they had the exact same background, didn't they?
Pretty much.
They came from the same stock. So what determined who they were of was not who they were born to, but how they treated one another, how they practiced their religion to some extent, perhaps, but also Abel didn't kill Cain. Cain killed Abel. So
I guess you could say, as it has been from the beginning, family members aren't always the same, or we see this conflict in families to whatever degree, but they're raised by the same parents, but somehow one goes one way and one goes the other way.
Mm-hmm. That one of those old movies that may not be old to a lot of us, but it's old to people now, and that's the movie. Excuse me, A River Runs Through It, which is about I think a Lutheran or Presbyterian minister in Montana raising two sons, and same town, they're close in age, raises them exactly the same way, and one becomes a scholar and goes off into the world of academia, and the other one is smart too and is a local town reporter, but it becomes a I guess the ultimate thing is he becomes a compulsive gambler and loses his life because of gambling. And that's a good kind of example of that. But those two brothers still loved each other and still honored one another. Cain and Abel, it became a matter of strife between them, and Cain slew his brother. So what I think John is trying to say here is not so much who are they from. That you don't. It's not so much about their credentials or their background or their DNA, but in how they live and how they treat others. And if they are of God, if they are of Christ, they will treat people the way Christ treated them. And if they are full of strife and envy and anger and hatred, well, then they're not of Christ. They might be, have the same background as someone else who is of Christ, but they're not of Christ. So that's the test. He's transitioning from righteousness to love of brother, and righteousness is ultimately manifested in love of brother. We like to draw lines and compartmentalize and say this is this and that is that, and never the twain shall meet. How many American Christians believe that the separation of church and state is somewhere in the Bible? And it's not. The Bible, God's plan was not to separate the two. But that's what we have. And there's advantages to it and there's disadvantages to it. And I think in our contemporary society, it's mostly a good thing. But to be the people of God, in being the people of God, it just permeates your entire life. It's not something that, determines what I do on Sunday morning. It's something that determines what you do Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon, Monday night, on forward. It drives your whole life. And it drives not just your own technical morality, your own personal choices, but it manifests itself in how you treat your brother. I guess Cain asked the question, am I my brother's keeper? And he never really gets an answer. But I think the answer is, I don't know, but you shouldn't be your brother's killer. You could say that. That's one thing. Maybe you don't have to be your brother's keeper, but you sure shouldn't be your brother's killer. But the other answer, maybe to some extent, is yes. And as John, goes out the rest of the chapter, we'll see, yes, you are your brother's keeper. And the teachers that John is opposing evidently had hatred in the heart, maybe towards him, maybe towards other true teachers. But they had hatred in their heart, and that was an act of unrighteousness, or that's an aspect or a manifestation of unrighteousness, to hate your brother rather than to love your brother. Okay, verses 13 through 22. Do not be surprised, brethren, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed our death into life because we love the brethren. He who does not love abides in death. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth. We will know by this we are of the truth, and will assure our heart before him. In whatever our heart condemns us, for God is greater than our heart and knows all things. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do the things that are pleasing in his sight. Hi, Vicki. See you tuning in. Okay, so what do we think about verses 13 through 22?
Show me your deeds and you show me your faith, and this kind of, it says the same kind of thing. Show me your deeds and you'll show me your love.
Okay, that's fair. That's very fair. That love is not just a feeling or emotion. It is a manifestation in how we treat each other and how we treat our brothers. Um, anyone else have a take on it? That's a very good point.
Pretty strong words. Verses 15, he says, anyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And, I mean, you don't have to physically murder your brother, but you can if you hate him. I don't know that I've ever really hated anybody, except some people I didn't care for. But I don't know whether that is included in hate or not. I certainly hope not. But and what Paul David brought up, if we have the wherewithal to take care of our brother, it's up to us to do it. And we should do it willingly and lovingly. I think.
I was talking to someone just today about I'm not going to name the name of the country or the religion that's dominant there, but they have this belief that whatever lot you're born into in life is a lot that you've earned before you're in a prior life, basically. And what that does is allow you to, one of the things it does is allow you to look at them in need and close your heart to them because they're getting what they deserve. If they're poor and starving and wretched, well, they must have really done something before in a prior life. And if I'm wealthy and I have all of the world's needs, I don't have to do anything because I've done a good life. I've already been a good person. And it's kind of like Abraham telling the rich man, we're not coming down there. There's a gulf between us, and we're not even going to put a drop of water on your hot tongue. You're able to just as Dionne Warwick saying, walk on by.
And again, that shows the fault in human reasoning when it comes to religion, because I'm being rewarded for the good that I did before. So why wouldn't you want to keep doing good so you can be rewarded again when you come back the next time? It doesn't make any sense, I don't have to help him. He deserved it. He's getting what he deserved. Well, and I'm gotten all this because I was a good guy in the last time. And, so why?
Well, that presumes acts of generosity towards someone who is being punished for what they've done before is a good deed. You're defining that as a good deed. And to us, that would be a good deed.
Okay.
But if you don't think that's a good deed, then it's not improving your situation for the next life either. So, and look, it's maybe a clear example to us today about this, but let's face it, how many times have Christians looked at homeless people or whoever and thought, they must be drug addicts. Oh, they must be alcoholics. They want to be there. They deserve to be there. They should get a job. I mean, how many of us can close our heart and our eyes to the people who need around us? I'm not going to name the name of the congregation either here, but it was in the King County region. Sherry and I visited, and they had just moved into a new place, and it was new to them, but it was an old retail establishment, and the homeless people, some of them at least, like to sleep out on the sidewalk underneath their front door, before in front of their front door, because it was covered and kept them out of rain. And the church's philosophy: we'll get the police down here, and we'll run these guys out. They don't have a right to the trespassing, and so and it sounds really bad. And it's I came up here one weekday morning, and it was in the early fall or whatever. It was pretty cold the night before, and there was somebody sleeping right around over by our trash can here. And before I could get out of the car and get over to talk to them, they were gone. I thought when I pulled off, I actually thought it was a dead body. Somebody had dropped a dead body. People leave stuff in church parking lots all the time. Dead cars, and again, I'm not going to. We're too polite of a company for me to say some of the stuff I found in church parking lots. Look, there's people that will write a check for a mission in Africa or to help poor people in Africa and step over a homeless person on their way into the post office to mail it. And I can't say I wouldn't have never been that kind of person. To look around at someone in need and maybe think, well, you're in America. There's all kinds of programs and all kinds of resources and all kinds of support for you. You're not living in some third world country that doesn't have Social Security, doesn't have disability, doesn't have anything like that. So, I mean, I can't say I've never done it. I can't say I wouldn't do it today. It's not, I guess it's something I have to work on, that whenever I think someone's trying to get in my wallet, my first reaction is to shut that wallet down. And it, not just homeless people, but salesmen too.
You gotta watch out for them guys.
Yeah. Well, I didn't work at your level. I've never dealt with anyone at your level of sales. I've always dealt with the retail guys, and they just most of them have way too much gold jewelry on for my taste when I see them. But hi, Nell, how are y'all doing?
That is a tough thing. Number one, you see them as you're driving down the street in your automobile or whatever.
In your big blue Dodge pick-em-up truck. Huh?
There you go. And how do you help them? You could jump out and give them a $5 bill or whatever. Whether that would help or not, I don't know. So and I struggle with standing on the corner with their sign, that they need some help.
Having a $5 bill wrapped in a track, huh?
Well, I'm not sure they eat the track. I mean, but I would assume that most of them are hungry.
Well, it's helpful for me if I have some time to think about it and ruminate on it, and then I can kind of maybe come up with the right response. If I have to make it instantaneously, and this is an area of growth for me, my instincts are always move on. But that's I had a friend in grad school who talked about, she saw some homeless people somewhere and she said, I just want to bring them all home with me. And I told her that just wait a little bit and that feeling will go. You'll get over it. She said, no, it won't. It gets worse. So she has more compassion in her heart for at least the unwashed masses than I do. And that's maybe something I need to grow. Mr. Kelso, do you have a comment?
Yeah,
Question?
I'd like to go back to verse 15 that Mark was talking about. When I was reading that, the thought crossing in mind is kind of it's similar to, and there's kind of a parallel there to Matthew 5:28, where it says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." You know, where our heart is, that's really where we're at in life. But you don't just look at a person and see that. It's, if you're getting the drift, it's, the reality is in here. What people see is not always true reality.
Yeah, I think even John gets to that verse 19, we will know this by that we are full of his truth and will assure our heart before him. And whatever our heart condemns us, for God is greater than our heart and knows all things. So our own measure of ourselves is important. At the same time, it's not the final determination either. You know, and when we have confrontations and conflict, there will always be conflict within the church. We have to get over the notion that we're all going to just be happy-go-lucky and peaceful with each other all the time. That's not going to happen. How do we handle conflict? What's the goal of how we handle conflict? Is the goal to win? Or is the goal to find some kind of reconciliation, some kind of resolution in which both sides feel heard and affirmed and valued, and that maybe both sides can grow out of the conflict? And that's not always possible in conflict. I mean, the biblical example of that is Barnabas and Paul going their separate ways. So that would be nice, but it's not always doable. But so you can have conflict without hatred. But when there is hatred, and Jesus his standard is not so, in a sense, what we do, but what we do comes out of our heart. And that's what goes into us does not condemn us. What comes out of us is what condemns us. You're not condemned by eating shrimp ceviche. You're condemned by walking stiff in your bill at the taco place on your way out, I guess. So, yes, sir.
This is basically a question. Looking at verse 13, where it says, "Do not be surprised by this, that the world hates you." The question is, the word hate there, and almost especially true as Paul uses that word. To me, that's a little bit different definition of hate than what I would use thinking myself as a kid. I get angry at you, I'm saying, but when I hate you, that's not what they're talking about here. I don't believe. This is a hatred that can lead to murder. This is a hatred that, or a desire.
It's not referring to a momentary emotion.
Yeah, it's something that, I guess you say, it's a part of that person has developed a way of thinking and reasoning that then expresses itself, and whether it's whatever, whether it's adultery, whether it's this, whether it's that, it doesn't matter. It's a desire, and I think it almost goes to the point. Yes, you don't have to commit it because you've committed it. You have committed it in your mind. Well, if you committed to murder in your mind of your fellow brother, then you stepped over a line. You crossed something that they're talking about here that I don't think we really use the word in that manner. I might be wrong, but that's the way I kind of look at it. It's not what I'm used to defining the word hatred. But yet I see hate in the world. I see people hating each other enough to kill them. Well, there you are. They got it. They have developed a hate that far. I can't imagine it. I don't have that. Even when I was in the service, I didn't hate. And I knew the missiles that I was in control of, the ICBMs, were designed to go and kill millions of people. And I didn't hate those people. I disliked it. I want to protect the country, our country. I thought that was the only way I could do it at that time. From the other side, it had, you know, more weapons than they needed to kill all the people in this country. So, I mean, it really takes a lot to think about. You can't just sit back and, oh, it's no big deal, or it is a big deal. If we don't kill them first, so there is some thought. You have to have some thought into it.
There's a saying, and I can't remember exactly who said it, but the soldier doesn't fight because he hates what is in front of him. He fights because he loves what is behind him. And I think that's probably a pretty generous assessment for some soldiers, but it's absolutely true for others. I mean, I think it's a mixture, but it kind of looks the same way. But in the context of this passage, you have how we're supposed to treat one another, but then how we can expect to be treated by the world. And if you think the world, if we're benevolent and we're kind and compassionate and loving, if you think that's going to win them over to us and make them love us, then you are wasting your time. You don't love the world because the world's going to love you. You love the world because God sent Jesus to die for the world. Because the planet is God's creation and all the people on it bear his image, whether they act nicely or not.
He loved the world so much he sent his only son. Well, that's the reasoning in my mind now that I try to excel in as much as I can. Sometimes I don't reach it, but I try to love. I try to love that person that's down on the street, down here in this little cubby hole down here. Run over the store over here and watch the bottles they put in the sack.
Well,
That's hard to do.
I don't want to embarrass y'all too much. Y'all have shown the willingness to take in strays. I don't know if there's any. And it started with Connie taking you in, Robert, actually. So it's kind of.
Well, you had mentioned before,
you were loved, and so you love others, right?
you had mentioned before, talking about, I can't put all the pieces together about it, but whether you were, whether you come by an accident or saw something, but anyway, you know that Sherry's reaction is to pray for the people or whatever, and your reaction was, they've created this wreck and it's slowing me down kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, that's
This inconvenience I'm enduring rather than the
right.
perhaps loss of life they've endured. So, yeah.
And so that's, you know, that's part of this growth area, but in her, whether, and I guess we gotta be careful because if we go too far, it talks about telling the person to go be warm and not doing anything is not, or say be fed and not giving them any food is not the right way to do it. But if we, depending on our circumstances, we go by and we see somebody and we say a prayer for them or hope, you know, that something, you know, that's at least in our heart the right thing to do. Whether or not we're going far enough, that's, you know, an individual and circumstantial situation. But at least your heart is in the right place instead of, like you say, looking at them saying they need to get off of our pretty church sidewalk and, you know,
Pull up your bloody stump of an arm and get in the car and pull it off to the side of the road so I can get around. Something like that. That versus I'm praying for. I think certainly you can always get into different scenarios, and when there's 911 people there, the first responders are all there. You getting out at that point is probably not. It's probably just the opposite. When you're out in the middle of the road, out in the middle of nowhere, and you're 20 miles north of Richland on that old desolate highway, and somebody's in the ditch on the side of the road walking around with their arm hanging by a string. Praying for them as you go on around them is not real helpful. So it's, there's always, you can look at what is the manifestation of love under the circumstances. So this, John gives us these circumstances, somebody in need and a brother in need. And how do you define that? Do you not define that as a Christian brother? Or do you define that as,
who is my brother?
yeah, who is my neighbor? Who is my brother? as a fellow human being, and having the means to address their need. If you're dirt broke too, you don't have any money. If you're on your way to the food bank, you see somebody that have any food, maybe you bring them some back from the food bank. I don't know, but it's power to do something and calling upon them to do it. I think in Christ goes a step farther than that, and to give ultimately all, to love people as Christ loved us. And when we do that, it goes beyond what even really they want. Just as God knows us better than we know ourselves and knows our heart better than we know our own heart, Jesus loves us more than we could ever love ourselves and died for ourselves. So there is no real limit to, if Jesus laid down his life, then we should certainly be willing to do some of these other things which are not nearly as big of an imposition. Let's look at 23 and 24, and we can move on to chapter 4 next week. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. The one who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him. We know that by this that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. And we'll be getting into testing the spirits next week. But John is just asking his audience to look at the people that are talking to them, judge them fairly, see how they are treating one another, and who are you going to follow? Who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to people that are compassionate and loving and generous, or are you going to listen to people who are harsh and people who hate and people who do not share or give or practice their generosity? So, and from this test, again, the false teachers are trying to undermine their confidence. John is saying, from this test, you can be confident. So that's a pretty short shrift on those two verses, but we'll maybe revisit them briefly next week, but as we get into chapter 4. So thank you for your attention and your comments. Mr. Kelso will lead us in a closing prayer.